All right, welcome to Friday on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You know what we do on Fridays? It's the Morning Pitt Mailbag. It's when we take all the questions from Pitt fans that you guys have been posting on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com all week long, or for the last day or two since I posted the thread asking for questions. We take all the questions you guys have been posting and we answer as many as we can right here in the Morning Pitt Mailbag. I always look forward to this. I hope you do as well. I think it's fun to let you guys sort of decide the topics to a certain extent and just kind of talk about it for a little bit. So let's get started. Morning Pitt Mailbag, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Friday. It's the end of the week. It's cold and snowy. It's winter in Pittsburgh, and we've got the Morning Pit here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You know the deal, of course. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You see the website below, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans all day, every day. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com to get all of your Pitt sports coverage. And you know we have our YouTube channel here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, where you can get all of our Pitt video content. Monday through Friday, we have these morning Pitt videos. We have our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. We're going to have some post-game basketball shows. We've done a couple already, and we'll have one tomorrow after the Duke game ends. Pitt at Duke tomorrow late afternoon. Once that game is over, or evening, I should say. Once that game is over, we will be live right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com to talk about it. And the best part about those post-game shows is you can be a part of it in the chat screen on the right. You can put your comments and questions there, and we interact. We go back and forth, have a little conversation about the game. I always look forward to that. Hopefully you can be a part of it tomorrow night. I'm sure we will be drinking. Given that it's Pitt Duke, what are you going to do? So like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and that way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So every week, put up a post. Usually, I try to put it up on Tuesday. Sometimes I forget and don't put it up until Wednesday. That was the case this week, but I put a post on the Between Fifth and Forbes message board on Panther-Lair.com. It's our premium football message board. Asking for questions for the mailbag that we do every Friday. And as always, Pitt fans came through with a bunch of questions, so let's jump into it. Bring up the questions here and get into the conversation. Question number 1 comes from A.S. Daniels, says, was Pitt's rare basketball success last year more beneficial or hurtful to the long-term health of the team? Interesting question to start off with. We actually have a bunch of interesting basketball questions here. I think the premise of this question, right? The premise of this question is, or sort of embedded in this question is the idea that last year's season was hurtful for the overall health of the program because it sort of guaranteed Jeff Capel more time. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's sort of how I'm perceiving it, that because they had that success, Jeff Capel got more time and is getting more time, even though he was never going to be fired at the end of last season regardless, and I don't think he's going to be fired at the end of this season no matter what happens from here through the end of February. I guess the idea is by winning and enjoying some success, did it give Capel a certain amount of extra capital that then will extend his stay, and by extension, and I think this is the implication of the question, cause longer term, hurt to the program, with the idea being that they need to move on. I'm guessing your premise is they need to move on from Jeff Capel, and because he won last year, he's going to stick around longer. A few things with that. I think if this year continues on the current trajectory, if they don't show any real turnaround this year, and if next year is more of the same, I'm not sure that last season's success will matter at all. If they had struggled last season, if last year looked more like Capel's first 4 years, I'm still pretty sure he would be back this year. So maybe at most you're looking at maybe one extra year based on the capital and goodwill of last season's success. So not a huge. It's not like he is guaranteed to be here for 4 more years because they won last year. But in the bigger picture of the question, I don't think success is a bad thing. I never think success is a bad thing. I can remember, very small pockets of reaction to the Coastal Division Championship in 2018. I actually got a text from somebody who said that's the worst thing that could have happened because that means Narduzzi is going to be around for, more years. And I was like, wow, that's a really negative reaction to a pretty positive development and a pretty positive outcome. And obviously 3 years later, I think that was proven right because they won not just the Coastal, but the ACC. I think if somebody has a successful season, that shows you that they're capable of a successful season, which means the possibility exists for that success to be repeated or to happen again. Now, of course, in the case of Jeff Capel, it was 4 bad seasons and 1 successful season. And so certainly the possibility of more bad seasons exists as well. But I just don't think it's a bad thing to have success. I don't think last year was a bad thing. And if anything, I think it showed what Capel can do with a certain kind of roster. Now, what we've seen this year is, when you don't have those senior veteran guards, you take a step back. I mean, that's really the biggest difference between last year's roster and this year's roster is last year they had Jamarius Burton and Nelly Cummings, and those are the 2 guys that I would isolate. I wouldn't even really throw Nike Sabandi in there. I wouldn't throw Greg Elliott in there, even though those were good players who made significant contributions to that team's success. But really the biggest difference in terms of impact players, the players whose absence is felt the most, I think, whose absence hurts the most, is Cummings and Burton for reasons that we've talked about all week. I talked about it on the Morning Pit the day after the Syracuse game. I talked about it, Jim and I talked about it on Wednesday night during the live stream. I'm going to write about it during, in today's 321 column, which depending on when you watch this video, will either be published in an hour or 2 or has been published already. And I wrote about it there that they just don't have those guys who can step up and make a big shot when the team needs a shot. Carrington and Lowe, Bub Carrington and Jalen Lowe might become those players. Jalen Lowe kind of was in the second half against Syracuse on Tuesday night. Blake Hinson just isn't that guy, or at least he hasn't been. And maybe he'll come out tomorrow night and he'll prove me wrong, and he'll prove all of us wrong, and he'll make big shots. And when Duke is on a run, he'll make big shots to stop the run, or if Pitt needs to extend a run or whatever, maybe he'll do it. Maybe Bub Carrington takes that next step forward, which I think he's very much capable of. I think Carrington can be that guy. He's just not there yet, not consistently. And it's an ongoing process for him. It's an ongoing, period of growth for him. Jalen Lowe, I think, took some steps forward in that second half against Syracuse. And I, the more I've looked at that, the more I've thought about it, that second half of the game and what Lowe did, I really think I was impressed by how he was able to perceive the situation, where if he got a slight opening where he could drive to his left, boom, he was gone. And he was in there for a layup. And he also could perceive when his teammates should get the ball. And so you end up with Pitt made 13 field goals in the second half, and Lowe either scored or assisted on 10 of them. I mean, he pretty much was their offense in the second half of that game, and he was making shots when Pitt needed shots to be made, and that's how Pitt ends up, tying Syracuse in the second half, 32-32. They needed Lowe to do that in the final 10 minutes of the first half. But I think he only took 1 or 2 attempts in that stretch, whereas Carrington took 4 and Hinson took 3. So, I mean, I'm getting off topic here. It's just because it's something I keep thinking about. I'm curious to see how Jalen Lowe does tomorrow night. But that's what they're really missing. I think that's what's missing from, this year's roster that they had last year, is that ability to make a shot when the team needs a shot, which Cummings and Burton had, and this team hasn't quite developed just yet. Like I say, I think Carrington will get there. I think Lowe is getting there. They're just not there yet. They could be there by the end of the season, but they're not there yet. If you can get Carrington and Lowe back next year, which I think is just sort of one of those things where you just have no idea if you're going to have them back or not, just because you don't know if you're going to have anybody back, because that's what college sports are these days, particularly basketball, but football as well. If you could guarantee that those guys are going to be back next year, I'd like to see what Jeff Capel can do with those guys as second-year players. I think they would take some big steps forward, and the team could really build and have some success next year. In the meantime, you're going through some growing pains right now. But to the question, was last year, harmful to the overall health of the program? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it was very good to break a long streak of losing and a long streak without much success. I think it was good to break that and, give everybody something to feel good about for a little while. Rhino527 says, are we approaching the worst peak Panther-Lair era combined football basketball season status? Kind of a jumble of words there, but I think what you're saying is this the worst, football basketball at the same time that we've seen since I started on this job? And maybe. I would say, maybe, possibly. I'm just kind of scrolling through here. Let me see. I'm looking back. So the first period that came to mind when I tried to think of like when else has been a really rough stretch. And the first period that came to mind was sort of the overlap of the Todd Graham year, 2011 football season, into that offseason of football, which overlapped with the 2011-2012 basketball season, which was the CBI year. And I'm looking back through their schedule. They lost one game in the non-conference. They lost to Long Beach State. But that was it. They lost to Wagner. They lost to Wagner as well before they got into conference play. And then they lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in a row, right? They started 0-7 that year in Big East play. Before they won a few and then lost more, and conference record they ended up 5-13 in Big East play. Right around the time Todd Graham was leaving, they beat Tennessee on the first Saturday of December. They beat VMI. They beat Oklahoma State. So they were actually putting together some pretty good wins up until they lost to Wagner in the non-conference finale that season. But in terms of like a low point, that's pretty far up there. The way Todd Graham left, the way that offseason felt, I think people were glad with the hire of Paul Chryst, but it's not like it was really exciting, and I don't think it took away from the sting of Todd Graham leaving like he did, and then to follow that with a basketball season that ended with, in the CBI, championship notwithstanding, it ended in the CBI. That was a pretty big low point. You could probably look at 2017. Let's see what pitch record in basketball was in 2017, 2016, around that area, because Pitt football went 5-7 in 2017. In the 2016-17 basketball season, Pitt went 4-14 in the conference, 16-17 overall. That was Kevin Stallings' first year. And then that following season, they went 0-18. All right, so that's a pretty bad stretch right there. If you want to compare stretch to stretch, right? You have Pitt football in the fall of 23 going 3-9, and Pitt basketball on its current trajectory, fall of 23 into spring of 24. If you go back, fall of 2017, Pitt football went 5-7. Fall 17 into spring 18, Pitt basketball went 8-24 overall and lost every conference game. 18 losses in a row, plus the ACC tournament, and so 19 losses in a row. That was bad. That had to have been the worst. I would say the vibes were worse in 2011, 2012. Just because of how far the basketball program fell from its more recent success to being in the CBI, and then the whole Todd Graham debacle. But in terms of success and on-field success, and I mean, I know the Pitt football team in 2017 ended the season with the win over Miami, but they were a 5-7 team. And then you segue right from that into a basketball team that only won 8 games and got blanked in conference play, didn't win a single ACC game. I mean, this year's team at least has won one, and I think they'll win a few more before it's all said and done. So that, in terms of on-field, on-court results, that's probably the low point, I would say. I would have to think about it, go back and search through, but I'm not sure you're going to do much worse than 0-18 in ACC play. So that would probably have to be the lowest of the low. Smenges follows up on our conversations earlier this week about must-win games. He says, what happens after the team loses a must-win game? What does it mean for the season, for the fans? Also, can a big upset win now cancel out the loss of a must-win game and make a later game the new must-win game? So I'll admit to falling victim to something that I generally reject and try to avoid, and that's getting too caught up in something like calling a game a must-win game. And I certainly fell victim to that. I used it in the headline of Morning Pitt videos twice this week. On Tuesday, to preview the Syracuse game, we called it a must-win game. And on Wednesday, to recap the Syracuse game, we said Pitt lost the must-win game. And I don't like doing that. I try to avoid that. I feel like it gets annoying, and it ultimately, in the end, the words don't mean anything. And you can take it very literally the way Smenges is doing here, and rightfully so. And I've done this to other people. I've certainly been on that side of it, to take it so literally just to try to point out how ridiculous it is. But I think you understand the point that we were driving at when we talked about that Syracuse game. Sandwiched as it was between two games against Duke, Pitt needed a win to sort of right the course and also offset what seems like probably two losses, one against Duke and then another against Duke. You couldn't, at some point you need to start getting wins where you can get wins. And Syracuse at home seemed like a game where Pitt could get a win or should get a win. And that's what made it a must win, because if you look at a 20-game conference schedule, I mean, coaches aren't going to think about it like this, and it certainly, I don't mean to dismiss the possibility of upsets or surprises, but generally speaking, when you look at a 20-game schedule, you've got some games that you're pretty likely to lose and some games that you're pretty likely to win, and then you've got these games in the middle that could sort of maybe go either way. And some years, the likely to lose category is bigger than the other two. Some years, the likely to win category is bigger than the other two. Some years, all three are equal. Some years, the middle group is the biggest category, and you're trying to find out where you fit and sort of stack up. I think likely to win is where I would put the Syracuse game on Tuesday night. And that's what made it sort of a must win, is because as they continue to play and as they continue to lose games, the category of likely to win shrinks. And if that's the case, you need to win every game you possibly can in there. I mean, that's where you're likely to win. That's where you're going to stack up the most victories to build that conference record and ideally build that resume for the postseason. And so if you blow one of those opportunities, a likely to win game, then you're hurting yourself. You're putting pressure on yourself to either win more of that middle group or ultimately win more from that top group of likely to lose games. And that's tough. So you have to take care of business when the opportunities present themselves. And that's what made that game a must-win game. I probably overstated it. I probably spent too much time on it, but that's what sort of made it a must-win game in my view, is because it's just that question of how many of these types of games do you have left? And if you can't win one of these games, what does that say about your chances when you do play Notre Dame? You know what I mean? When you play Louisville again. Bleh. It starts to call into question of how likely you are to win those other games. And that's where I think all that, that significance came from, at least in my view. SV Pig 1 says, how much has the front court hurt this year's Hoops team? Fetty and the Twins showed late flashes in the tournament, but have totally regressed this year. If Hughley was still on the team, what would Pitt's record be? The last part, I don't know. What is John Hughley doing at Oklahoma? I should have brought this up. Let me look up the Oklahoma basketball stats for this season and see what John Hughley is doing in this 2023-24 season. Now, Hughley has played in 17 games. He has started one game this year. He is averaging 9 points and 4 rebounds per game. So even though he has played in every game, even though he's only started one game, he's averaging 18 minutes and he's averaging 9 and 4. That would be pretty good production for Pitt's front court. What's Pitt's record with him? I don't know. What's Oklahoma's record right now with John Hughley? They're 14-3 overall. They're 2-2 in the Big 12. So if Hughley could come in here and average 9 and 4, yeah, that'd be a big boost. That would be more than they're getting from their bigs right now. How much of an issue has the front court been? I think it's been a big issue. I never really expected much out of those guys offensively. Didn't really think they were going to provide much of an offensive presence around the rim, not provide much of an offensive presence near the hoop and all that. But I thought I thought Fetty would be better defensively, and I thought Guillermo's game would slowly progress and develop. And Federico hasn't been good defensively, hasn't been a great rebounder, and has looked lost at times. And Guillermo has, looked good early, but hasn't continued to progress and develop, particularly as the competition level has gone up. So, I think it's a big problem. I don't think it's their biggest problem. I think the biggest problem is that Blake Hinson is averaging, in the last 5 games, averaging less than 13 points per game. 12.8 points per game and shooting under 30% from the field in the last 5 games. That's the biggest problem. If you ask me, like, if I had to pick one thing that's holding this team back more than anything else, it's Hinson's scoring, particularly over the last 5 games. And that I would put above the center position 10 times. I would list Hinson 10 times before I would get to the centers. Because that's where you expected your offense to come from. You expected Hinson to score. Bub Carrington, I know he went 0 of 10 the other night, but still in the last 5 games, he's averaging 12.6. So he's right there, basically averaging the same scoring per game as Blake Hinson over the last 5, which is good for Carrington. I mean, he's only shooting 34%, so he could step up his efficiency a little bit, but he's producing points. That's good, despite getting blanked in the Syracuse game. But it's bad that Hinson's scoring is down there. He needs to be in the 18 to 20 points per game region, or in that area. And he has not been there since they went into the ACC, schedule full time. And that's the biggest problem. And so we can talk about the front court. We can talk about how they don't have any guards off the bench. We can talk about how they weren't able to recruit other guards. We can talk about lots of different issues. We can talk about Will Jeffers not being, able to score, although he was the only guy who scored in those final 10 minutes of the first half, which is probably part of the problem, that he was the only one. We can talk about Zach Austin and chaos points. We can talk about a lot of storylines. And we can talk about this and we can talk about that. It really just comes down to Blake Hinson. And if that's an unfair amount of pressure to put on him, I apologize. But that's the role he's in. And that's the role he needs to play. That's where he needs to be, is leading this team. And he's still the leading scorer, but he needs to be more. He can't go through a 5-game stretch in conference play and average 13 points per game. It's got to be 18 or 20. That's who he has to be. That's who he was expected to be. It's who he was last year. It's not who he's been this year. And that's a problem. That's a big problem. A bigger problem than anything with the centers. So, how much of a problem has the front court been? It's been a problem, but it's not the biggest problem. All right. Finish up with 2 questions here. Butler Pitt fan says, does Cade Bell's offense require a different type of offensive lineman than we've seen Pitt recruit? How do we imagine a tight end like Gavin Bartholomew will be used in this offense? More H-back, more blocking, none of the above? And then Scoyce asks something very similar, says, do you think Gavin Bartholomew will move back to his really effective H-back role from 2 years ago in Cade Bell's offense? I'm hoping the Jake Overman transfer allows them to run 12 personnel with Gavin in the backfield or 11 personnel with Gavin in space more. I think his talent is wasted being in line so much. I don't have any answer to that, guys. I really don't. I'd like to think, in an ideal world, Cade Bell sits down and says, let's look at the talent that we've got, sees Gavin Bartholomew and says, ooh, I have an idea on how to use this guy. Watches 3 years of tape of Gavin Bartholomew and says, so in one of these 3 years, he did these things really well, and in the other 2, he didn't do those things, and it didn't go as hot. You'd like to think that's what Cade Bell's going to look at. You'd like to think that's what he's going to say, or is what he's going to see and how he's going to react to it. I don't know what his reaction is going to be. It's something we'll have to ask him about, and I look forward to talking to him about it when that time comes. But that's what I would do And I mean, we've talked about it on Panther-Lair.com for a couple years now about usage and comparing his usage, from 2021 versus 22 and 23. And I mean, there are clear differences in usage and there are clear differences in production. And to me, 1 + 1 = 2. When he was used in a certain way in 2021, his production was much better than when he was used in a different way in 22 and 23. So if I'm the offensive coordinator, I'm going to try and do what they did in 21. Now, they also had Lucas Krull. They also had Jordan Addison. That can take some pressure off of a guy to sort of leak into the flat and catch a bunch of passes. And, I think his average, depth of target was like less than 2 yards downfield. But he also made a lot of plays, and he was one of the leaders in yards after the catch that year. It helps if you have guys like Krull and Addison to take, some of the pressure off and take some of the focus off. But yeah, you got to try and find ways to give him the ball, and ideally in some similar usage to what he did in 2021. All right, great questions this week. I appreciate everybody who posted questions. We'll take more questions next week. If you want to be part of the mailbag, as always, you post your questions on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, and we'll answer as many as we can here on Fridays. Thanks so much for watching today. Thanks to everybody who submitted questions. Thanks for watching the videos all week. We really appreciate it. And if you appreciate these videos, if you enjoy them, like and subscribe. That's all we ask you to do. Like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. All day, every day, Panther-Lair.com. No. I mixed the taglines there. Did you see that? I went right from our Pitt video content all day, every day. No. We got a lot of Pitt video content at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and we have a lot of Pitt coverage at Panther-Lair.com. So check them both out. And then, enjoy it. Thanks again. We appreciate it. We'll have a lot of preview content to get you ready for Pitt Duke tomorrow. And then we'll have a post-game show after the game right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you stay tuned. Don't miss it. Enjoy the game tomorrow. And we will talk to you for the post-game show right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.